Do you think this is potentially a housing bubble? Because when we did the numbers, for people to be able to afford a home in California, their income has to be double of what they're making, roughly around that.
Yeah, if you look at the what we call the housing affordability index, that is an index that look at how much people need to have as income in order to buy what we call a median price home, which is a typical home for an average home buyer or average homeowner. That number, that income required is somewhere around 215,000. If you look at how it compares to a typical household, median income household in California, which is right around 90,000-ish or so, that's significantly higher. So I wouldn't be surprised. People are questioning and asking, hey, how come home prices have gone up so much? And is that, does it make it a little tough for people to buy? And does that make that demand going to come down eventually and cause prices to maybe slow down? Now, if it was maybe 20 years ago when we were at 2007, 2008, at that price, I would be a little bit more concerned. And the reason why I'm less concerned now is back then when we look at some of the statistics, back then we saw people putting down, let's say, 1% down payment, 5% down payment, or maybe 3% down payment. And so we knew that at that time that people would not be able to afford if something happened to the economy. But fast track to recently, in the last, let's say 5 years, 10 years or so, we have been keeping track of how much people actually put down on as down payment. People typically put down 10%, maybe even 20%, maybe even 30%. And when they put down 10, 20, 30% at the beginning, and prices have gone up by about 20, 30%, that means they really have quite a bit of equity in their house. They could have maybe about 30% or maybe even 40% of the value of the house as their equity. So imagine this, if prices actually come down 10%, those people who have 20, 30% equity, they're not likely going to just give the keys back to their lenders. They may decide to sell, but it might not be the scenario that happened 20 years ago when people just throw their keys back and so they have to default and everything. So if the question is, do we expect home prices to maybe come down a little bit? Sure, there's a possibility that we could see some slowing of home prices, maybe in the next couple months, maybe before the end of the year. But I don't expect home prices to drop quite significantly. Part of the reason is because of supply. I think supply is a major issue in California, and that tight supply issue is probably going to keep prices from dropping too much.
You mentioned supply. The number of homes in the market this year has gone up significantly compared to last year. Is that considered part of the supply?
So when you look at supply, of course, you look at supply from the existing housing market and also the supply from newly built homes. So let's talk about the supply from the existing market first. Now, a lot of people during COVID purchased their home at 2%, 3% interest rate, and they lock in their rate. And since then, interest rates have gone up to 6%, 7%, 8%. So they lock up their mortgage, and they don't want to actually relocate to another place by just selling their home and purchasing another home at a much higher interest rate. So we call that lock-in effect, or some people will call it mortgage prisoners effect. Now, people don't want to put their house up on the market because if they were to do so, and if they move to a similar house at a similar price, but they have to pay a 6% or 7% interest rate, that means they might have to actually lose $50,000 just by moving up or moving down. So because of that reason, in the last few years, a lot of people actually lock up those supply. Now, you and I both know, life goes on, life event goes on, people get married, people expand their family. So 5 years down the road, people purchase a home 5, 6, 7, or 8 years ago, they probably have the need to actually move somewhere else or maybe relocate or expand their home. Now, some people will actually build a bigger house, but other people decide, okay, well, maybe it's time for me to actually move to other places, especially since when they realize that 6.5%, which they thought eventually it's going to come down to 3%. That never happened in the last couple of years. I think people start accepting the norm that, okay, well, maybe 6.5% could go down to 6.25. If that's happened, then maybe I should put the house up on the market. So you started seeing more people put their house up on the market, a little bit more supply, partly because people realize that the new normal is really not 3%. The new normal is really maybe 5.5 or 6%. And also they realize it's probably time for me to, move on and maybe move to another place